Okay, hello and welcome to episode number 14, or is it 13? Shit, I can't even remember, of Bad Teacher Podcast. And I'm excited to introduce our second guest of
Let's
the
go.
of the podcast. And so I will let him get to it. Who are you? What do you teach? How long you been doing it? I know you're a coach too, so go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience.
What's going on? First and foremost, Kara, thank you for having me on the Bad Teacher Podcast. I'm ready to get naughty. Um, Christopher Timms from Waterloo, born and raised Waterloo, Iowa. I teach U.S. history and I teach a class called the African American Experience, essentially African American Studies. Previously, I did teach a college level course through one of our community colleges, U.S. History 2, and since 1877. That was wonderful. Due to programming, we're no longer offering those courses, more AP and IB route. Those were concurrent courses. I coach wrestling as well. Just was named the lead coach of our newly combined high school, Waterloo United. And so I'm really excited to build the program along with the other coaches and move that legacy forward and build upon the rich legacy of wrestling already that exists in Waterloo. But I've been teaching now for 14 years. It's been a phenomenal experience. I've gained a lot of wisdom on the way, had a lot of challenges as well, but all of those have been a culmination that have built me up to who I am today. So I'm just grateful to be here and I'm ready to discuss and have a great conversation.
Yeah, and I'm thankful that you're here too. And I love working with people. All my guests so far have been people that I've grown up with. And I think that we just have a lot to offer. A little
Yes,
baby space in the world, but we have a lot to offer teachers, in the United States for sure.
absolutely. It's a big world out there.
Yep, yep. Okay, so what inspired you to be a teacher? What inspired you to get into coaching?
Great question. What inspired me to teach? I was a junior. It was my junior year at Waterloo East High School. And by that time, I'd already seen my fair share of educators. And I've seen educators do the job so impactfully, effectively, and well. And then I saw the opposite of when the pendulum swings and the
Mhm.
job is not being done the way that it should be. And so I saw the results of how teachers showed up. The ones who showed up with love, encouragement, with power, they built students up. They empowered students. Students were better for it. The ones who did not do that, I saw people fall through the cracks. I saw students who were allowed to display certain behaviors that weren't going to be advantageous to them in their future, technically not even in their present when they were engaging in those behaviors. And that was what kind of inspired me. I've had two amazing, really amazing teachers. I've had quite a few, but two stand out, Mr. Tracy and Miss Platty. I had both of them and I couldn't stand math, but I love Miss Platty. Love Miss Platty. I loved her because she built relationships. She made me feel seen when I was in her classroom. She motivated and pushed me. Math was not the subject that I enjoyed. I couldn't stand it, but she
Mhm.
was willing to sit with me, take me through the information and the material that was complicated for me, and I loved her for that. And she still is a guide, a mentor today. We actually teach together. And so that's one of the really cool things about being back in the school that I came through is getting to now collaborate and be a colleague along with the two who inspired me to even start this journey. Mr. Tracy was like the same thing. Now, that's my bag. That's my bag. I teach history only because at the time where I was going to go into education, you also had to teach mechanics of writing. And I'm a
Yeah,
decent writer, but when it comes to teaching and instructing the mechanics, I didn't feel comfortable. So I chose my second favorite subject, history.
history.
History. But
I
if
love that.
Mr. Tracy, the GOAT, the
Yep.
GOAT, just seeing how he leveled with students. I remember being in the classroom and him being on a stool while we were engaged in conversation as a
Yep.
whole class. It wasn't just him up lecturing. It was all of us taking part in the conversation. And sometimes those conversations got heated.
Yep.
Sometimes we left class like, man, that was intense. But man, we
Yep.
got better. We got pushed. We got stretched. And so those are memories that I look back on and I smile just because an impact was made. And I wanted to do the same thing for students. I wanted to stand in the gap and be someone that they can count on, be someone that they can see themselves in, and just be an inspiration and a positive impact in people's lives. And it's the same thing with coaching as well.
Yep. Yeah, I also had both of those teachers. Mr. Tracy, I really liked that he brought his whole self into the room, all of his vulnerabilities,
Yes.
the music he liked, and then he opened up that like ideological space for us to also be ourselves and take
Yes.
risks and say things that we weren't completely sure about. And then kind of work through that as a class. Like you said, it was more of a conversation rather than him, putting a chip in our brain and saying, this is the way that you do things. This is the interpretation of the
Absolutely.
text. Miss Platty, I have a funny story about her. Oh, well, it's not even her. It's me. It was me talking about math because, that's not my
Yeah.
strong subject either. So it was like, I think my junior year, and it was the end of the school year, and I was tired. I don't know, I was on some crazy stuff in high school. So I was falling asleep. And I had a question. So I'm like, I raised my hand, like, what's going on?
Yes.
And as she's responding to my question I asked, I fell back asleep
Wow.
in front of
You weren't snoring,
everybody.
were you?
No, no, just like nose up. She's like, Kara. And then I heard her, like, Kara, Kara. And I woke up and I knew what I did. I'm like, oh my God, it's so embarrassing. So
Wow.
I get up, because I had to, I'm hyper. So I have to get up and like laugh it off. And Buck, this dude, I don't even remember his last name, but his name was Buck and he had big feet and his foot was right next to my desk. So when I get up, I trip on his foot
Wow.
and fall. Oh my God. And she will
Oh my
not
God.
let me get that down. She's still like, just like 2 months ago, posted something about that on Facebook. I'm like, you're never going to let me forget.
No, I missed that one because
Oh,
I would have loved it. I would have hearted it. Maybe put some laughing emojis in there. Because
so funny.
I thought this story ended with you nodding off. You fell
Yeah,
down too. But you got back up.
so funny. Okay. Anyways, so back to the topic. More serious topic, of course. How do you, this is something that I want to ask a lot of teachers because I think it's super important. And something that we don't get to discuss as much. So especially like in me being a pre-service professor now, and I would just like to flesh this out a little bit more. So how do you center working class knowledges and stories into your instruction?
Working class knowledges and stories into my instruction. Well, number one, Waterloo is a working class community. When you talk about blue collar community, a lot of Waterloo is that. John Deere is the number one employer. Tyson's is the second employer, and then Waterloo Schools is the third highest employer. So our top two is it's factory work, it's hard work. And so I try to bring that knowledge into the class. Here's one way I do it. And hopefully this one this one sticks. There was always growing up this saying when teachers wanted to try to light a fire under a student and get them to understand that education was important, and they would start talking about the future of that kid. And they would say, well, you don't want to be working at McDonald's for the rest of your life, do you? Hmm? And as I started teaching in Waterloo, I came to the realization of how many of our students, parents, and guardians keep the lights on, put food on the table, put clothes on their backs, put gas in the car off of McDonald's. That's where they work. Who are
Amen.
we to demean the livelihoods of the parents and guardians of the students that we say that we love and care about? That just didn't make sense to me. So for one, I stopped saying all kind of things like that. Like, and if teachers say it around me, I'm very quick to correct out of love, because the last
Mhm.
thing I want is for that to come out of somebody's mouth while well intentioned, not having the effect that they think it's going to have. Because the reality is, man, one of my wrestlers on my team, his parents, his mom, the supervisor at McDonald's. So like you'll crush a kid's heart saying those kind of things, or well, you're going to end up in a factory for the rest of your life. You know, also another way that I do is I let students know that there are tons of career pathways. That college, great, but unless your profession requires a collegiate degree, like it may not be necessary. Open up your mind to the other opportunities out there. I'm grateful for the Waterloo Career Center, which offers a lot of trade opportunities for students and gets students thinking in a way of, or outside of just going to the 4 year or the 2 year institution. you can get your internship at the WCC and then head right out into the workforce and start making money right away. No debt. There was a
Mhm.
student that was a plumber, got an internship, got a paid job, making $80,000 a year, no student loans. You know, that that's the move right there.
Yep.
In college, when I was going to school, and you could probably attest to this as well, I felt like we were very much pushed to go to college. Like that was the end all be all. If you want to be successful, go to college.
Mhm.
The reality is, if you want to be successful, you find your purpose, find your
Yep.
path, walk your path. And so now, as an educator, I look at my job as facilitating the dreams of students. So if your dream is to be a carpenter, well, how can I partner with you, come alongside with you, and help you get there? If you
Mhm.
want to manage your own business, how can I help you with, how can I help build the skill set, the mindset that you'll need, or in some ways, what you'll need to get to that next level? And so those are some
Mhm.
of the ways that I've done it. Also, just diversifying curriculum materials that I put in front of students.
Mhm.
Sometimes teaching history gives me a little bit of an advantage because there are times where I will bring in local history of Waterloo into the class. So then students get to see the story of the community that we live in, that we go to school in. And so we talk about the Illinois Central Railroad, which was how a majority of African Americans in the early 1900s got to Waterloo. Had it not been for the Illinois Central Railroad, the population of Waterloo's black population anyway, probably wouldn't look the way that it does today. And so that's significant. And so students, I felt that they needed to learn that information. And so we tie that in to our immigration unit, though it's not immigrating from another country, it's a migration from the rural South under Jim Crow to the North in Waterloo in seeking of better opportunities for themselves and their families.
Yeah, and I think that Waterloo has such a rich history of, working class resistance.
Yes.
And if we let the narrative be, then there was like this riot and these, subhumans burned down the whole city, and it was like, no, that's not what happened at all. This was during the civil rights movement. This was a microcosm of something that was happening internationally. This was a
Yes.
decolonial movement when African countries were becoming independent. In the United States, we were we were getting major civil rights act, the Civil Rights Act, but other laws too. These major civil cases and court cases
Yes.
passed. This was happening in Waterloo, Iowa, where they were resisting some of the corporatization of the East Side and
Absolutely.
low worker wages, etc. Right, and a type of segregated Waterloo, Iowa, even though it
Yeah.
wasn't in the South, still highly redlined. And so all of
Absolutely.
those local stories, feed into this larger understanding of these bigger,
Yes.
concepts that they can understand if they have something that they can see, like they know
Yes.
where that railroad is at.
Yeah, they do.
And then they can play, and then all of those stories can provide a foundation of understanding for the railroad company in general and what that did with the Gadsden purchase in the south of the United States and like with the United States invasion of Mexico, etc. And so I think that's super important. Another thing is also, how, I think that, so we're going to segue into this next question because I think, you said that African American people were brought in through the railroad company, and they were brought in as, and correct me if I'm wrong, as strike breakers.
Correct.
So even thinking of, how working class white people in Waterloo and working class black people have been pitted against each other by people that we don't even see or know since
Yes.
the very
Yes.
beginning of contact
Yes.
in Waterloo, and then also segregated it, physically. So then when you limit that contact physically, but you also bring people into the same polity,
Correct.
we get the situation that we're kind of living with today, was kind of some of the discussion that we talked about, before recording. And so
Yes.
I think that's monumental. And I think that this is, like you said, you have a little advantage in history, but I've known science teachers that do a very good job at this by just studying like water
Yeah.
pipes and how water, travels through and how that works. And so I
Absolutely.
think that there's space in anything that you teach. And so yeah, I think that's important. You're not going to find that in the curriculum. You're going to have to go out and do the work
Yes.
to know those things because we
And
didn't
those are,
learn
yeah.
that in school. Did you ever learn that in school?
Now, I only learned it because I wrote a paper over it in my undergraduate studies.
So that was still in college.
And so, yes, that was in college. I was aware that Black people came to Waterloo to work on the railroad because I have an ancestor that did, a great great that came along, and my mother told me that. But I did not realize just how that was or that was a part of the greater Great Migration that was going on,
Yeah.
where hundreds of thousands of Black Americans left the South in a mass exodus to find opportunities in the North. And so when you brought up the Illinois Central Railroad and they're coming up as strike breakers, absolutely. The powers that be weren't paying the white workers what they felt that they deserved, so they went on strike. Workers' rights. Black Americans looking for a better opportunity, leaving the Jim Crow South, lynchings, voter suppression, Jim Crow
Yep.
laws. They came to Waterloo because the opportunity was there. These jobs are open. They pay better than what we had in Mississippi. I'm no longer sharecropping.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a dead end. I have an opportunity to do something for myself. And so it's really interesting that that conflict took place, and both of those individual groups had very serious needs,
Mm-hmm.
but they were pitted against each other, and it was almost as if it was done on purpose. But
Of course it was done on purpose. This is over and over and over what corporations do.
yes,
Yeah, this is over and over and over what they do. And then another comment that I wanted to make. I love that whole McDonald's thing has driven me up a wall since I was a teacher. And so I would never say that to a student because, like, exactly like you said, these are people that are putting food on the table for their children. They're going to work. They're working harder than your mom, who,
yes,
is working 8 hours a day. They might be working 9 or 10 hours a day. So who's working harder? Who's working more hours a day?
absolutely.
Etc. And then I also think that how we could reframe that narrative is workers' rights, right? Like, well, what is the
Yes,
problem with working at McDonald's? Is it low wages? Well, then if this is a multi-billion-dollar company, McDonald's is, then why
correct.
aren't they paying their workers more than $10 an hour? Why is the federal minimum wage still $7.25? And it's been like that, for 20 years now. These are the questions that we need to be asking for our students
Yes,
to be able to, start wondering, yeah, why is that?
yes. Why
And
did
they can
Iowa
look
roll
into it
back
and
the age limit for getting employment?
yep.
And now we start to see more employers populating their businesses with high school age students,
Children.
children.
Yep.
And like these children are working hours to help support the family.
Yep.
Like it is,
Yes.
it's interesting as it unfolds and you see it in real time. You
Yep.
know, the things that make you go, And I
Mm-hmm.
always wonder, like, as a people, when I say as a people, I mean all of us as Americans, like when will we wake up and see like what is going on? Or by the time that it hits the fan and it's too late, is that when we're gonna finally the light bulb goes off? Like these things are happening right in front of us, and they don't happen all at the same time. They happen bit by bit, inch by inch, but if you don't begin to put the pieces together and start to begin to analyze and ask critical questions, then you kind of get lost in the sauce and you
Yep.
don't see
Yep.
what's being done right in front of you.
And I refuse to give teachers passes anymore because it's like, when you're gonna wake up, like, nah, like, you are well aware, you're well woke. You know what I mean? Like, you're allowing your eyes to lie to you if you can't see it. And I refuse, especially white teachers, I refuse to give any white teachers passes. Like, if I hear a white teacher say, I'm just doing my job, it's like, yeah, you're counter revolutionary. Like, you are an enemy, not an enemy in like a war type of way, but like, you are working directly opposed to me and my mission as a teacher, as an educator, and as somebody who wants to provide what everybody needs in society, and the knowledge to be able to fight for those who are most vulnerable. You're in the way, and you can't tell me you can't see it. You just like your privilege. You just want to, you are scared of what a world could look like where you can't lean on your privilege and you actually have to lean on merit. And we're not going to talk about how people say merit when they really mean privilege, but I'll just leave that there. I'll just leave that there. Okay. So working class, that's more of a broader, that's like you said, Waterloo, Iowa. What about how you center Black and Brown students in particular, and those local knowledges in the classroom?
for our black and so as a history educator, history is so diverse, it's so rich in its perspective. I try to bring in diverse voices into the conversation so that way our students have a better idea of what was going on.
Real quick, sorry to interrupt. Can you define what you mean by diverse?
So, diverse voices, what I mean by that is we'll look at primary sources
Okay.
from the time period by Black and Brown people so that way we
Okay.
can get that firsthand experience. And so, when we're teaching Reconstruction after the Civil War, that's actually the first module that we teach for our freshmen. Um, Many people can teach the Civil War or Reconstruction and not touch how Jim Crow laws and the rolling back of newly put amendments and laws was done on purpose and done to suppress the rights and the progress of Black Americans. They just look at it as, well, the South kind of went back to its old ways. Yeah, deliberately, not by accident. Like
Mm-hmm.
Reconstruction was destroyed after Lincoln's assassinated, Johnson gets into the presidency, the reparations that were supposed to be given to those who were enslaved were then given to the ones that
The
rebelled against
enslavers.
the nation. It was given to the enslavers for them to
Mm-hmm.
rebuild their lives with. And
Mm-hmm.
then the people who were enslaved, who are newly free, well, what's the good of this freedom when I have nothing? I have no land, I have no job, you won't give me a job, and the only job that you will give me is returning back to the same place that I just left. So you can put me in debt as a sharecropper and forever keep me here. So giving students that experience, because when you read it from a secondary source or a textbook, you get an overview. When it's someone's actual story and what they lived, now you get the experience. Now you can build empathy. You can see almost yourself through it in the way that they described their experiences. You get more of a personal account of what took place. So we do that, not to be cliche, but during Black History Month, we do a feature every month, but also during every single month, we do whatever the cultural focus is for that month. That's what we do. So whether it's Hispanic Heritage Month, whether it is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, at the beginning of class, in any one of those months, Women's History Month, we have a feature. So like the first 5 to 10 minutes is on that. And I try to introduce the students to the people that they don't know. So when we go through Black history, I don't present over Dr. King. You know him well enough. I don't present over Rosa Parks, but I'll let them know who Claudette Colvin was, who did exactly what Rosa Parks did before she did it, but
Yep.
did not get the credit that she deserved. So I'll introduce those people. Fred Shuttlesworth. We'll talk about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And sometimes like our students just see him as this huge movie star, but they don't know that look, he's black, he's brown. He also has Pacific Islander in him. He's diverse. And we can celebrate him. And there's a reason why he was cast as the character Maui in Moana. That's his culture. That's who he is. So it's bigger than just landing a role or making money off this entertaining movie. It's about representation. It's about bringing a culture to the screen. And young people and adults can watch this film and see cultural aspects highlighted in this cartoon that are very realistic and meaningful. And I think that that's powerful. So I'll bring somebody like that into the classroom who kids know, but then put a new light on that individual so students know that it's more than just entertainment. A Kendrick Lamar is more than just your favorite rapper. He's also a Pulitzer Prize winning writer, the
Yep.
only hip hop artist to ever win a Pulitzer Prize. So clearly his pen is strong. And I use that to even emphasize the importance of writing and how writing can take you to a lot of the places that you want to get to. Writing can take you. It's powerful.
Yep. Yep. Great. Great to hear. Yeah. Some of the things that I'm thinking about from what you said is, yeah, that Reconstruction period is so imperative to teach our students because, and please, you're the history teacher, so I'm just trying to rattle off what I remember in my head, but there was military presence from the North in the South to ensure that, emancipation was happening.
Yes.
And that, so there was, even at like pools and stuff, there was military people there that needed to be there to make sure that the poor white people and then the former enslavers, which would have been your higher class people, weren't continuing business as usual, right? With the chattel
Absolutely.
slavery as the economy. And then the United States government removed those troops in order to get
Yes,
Rutherford B. Hayes elected. So
correct.
they struck a deal, right?
They struck a
And
deal.
they struck a deal with the Southerners. If you vote for me, we'll remove the troops.
I love
And
using that as an example to illustrate to our students how you can't always get lost in the sauce with this Republican versus Democrat
that part.
debate because on TV, they're at each other's throats. And then when it cuts to commercial, they're shaking hands.
Yeah, and that was part of what transformed the South into a Republican dominant because these were Democrats
Yes,
at
originally.
that time. Yeah, and so that was one. I know the civil rights movement also put later on in the 60s pushed that even further. But yeah, and
Yes.
I think that our students really need to understand.
Yes, that gradual transition. And they missed that part. And one of the challenges is it's so hard to get into the weeds, right? They give you this curriculum map and you got to be at a certain place at a certain time. And it's so hard to get into the nitty gritty details. And I'll be honest with you, Kara, I'm still work in progress with how to give our students a more, I don't want to say accurate, but a more holistic view when it comes to history. It's not
Right.
perfect, but
It's yeah. And like a
highlighting those pieces is
structural,
important.
like a critical perspective, right? Of like
Yes,
there's these powerful actors that are actually doing all of this. So the working class needs to unite. And I know
yes.
that like in our classrooms, I don't know how you talk about the duopoly, which I'm now saying it like the Irish people about their two party system. They say it's two butt cheeks of the same arse. Yeah. So long story short, we only have one party that in the decadence of the United States culture, we say we have two. Um, and so I don't know how you talk about electoral politics in your classroom. Well, first of all, do you talk about electoral politics in your classroom, or do you kind of stay away from that, like Democrat Republican politics?
When we go into various subject matter, we usually have a lesson that will tie into the political decisions that were made, why they were made, how they impacted citizens. And so we talk about trying to think of an example, of course, here on the spot.
Hmm.
I'm drawing a blank here, but oh, when we go to Teddy Roosevelt, we'll talk about the square deal that he initiated and how the conservation of forests was a huge priority for him. He was an avid outdoorsman. And so, as a president, you see that reflected in his push to conserve the environment. But he was a sportsman. He hunted, he fished, he was out there. So, he knew the value of our resources. And if we don't take care of them, then we'll lose them. And so, we'll talk about how, as leaders, you do see personal parts of a leader's being reflected in their decisions. We
Yeah.
talked about, I tell the students, or we discuss how Woodrow Wilson screened Birth of a Nation in the Oval Office and how that movie helped to resurge the Ku Klux Klan. And they had over 1 million members. But this movie, W.D. Griffith put out, adapted from a play, it became Hollywood's first blockbuster. And the president
Mhm.
said it was like a brilliant film. And it characterizes the KKK as the heroes coming in to stop the savage, hypersexual black man from taking over. This is what America will look like if black people get into office and begin making decisions. And trying to get students without explicitly saying it to
Yeah.
make connections between what occurred then and what's going on now. Because I think as a historian, my job is to help students find the connection between past and present. That history
Yeah.
is a story, and the
Yep.
story is going on as you're a part of it. You're living, you're
You're living
breathing,
it.
you're in the story.
Hmm.
We're living the story. It's not something you just go to and pick up a book and it's like, oh yeah, these events happen in isolation and they're cemented in the time in which they happen. No, there's a ripple effect. What
Hmm.
transpired in this time period bleeds over into another one, and that's a huge challenge. Because, like I said, we start with Reconstruction, right? We talk about the
Yeah.
rolling back of these laws, but then we get to the civil rights movement in the 60s, and by that time we're in second semester. And I always tell our students, you need to hold on to this, like bookmark this, because we're going to come back to this, and we're going to keep coming back to it, but we're really going
Yep.
to come back to it when Black people en masse and allies will fight to gain what they already should have had. And I love it, and it's bittersweet when we finally get there, telling the students after we've gone through all this content, this whole time, Black people have been fighting. It's not like in the 1954 into the 60s, they just decided. There always has been a fight going on. And I try to bring that into the conversation as well. But then to discuss that before there was ever a Dr. King, Black people have been living in Jim Crow laws for decades. Before there was ever a Malcolm X, that was decades prior to him ever stepping foot into any type of auditorium or any type of space to speak to a crowd. That's the society that they grew up in, that they were born in. And so it's not a coincidence that you see Black people fighting in the 50s and the 60s, especially when you have Black veterans who fought in World War II against a threat that they said was so evil, the Nazis in Germany and Hitler. But yet some of what he was instituting in Germany, he was inspired by looking at America as the example.
Absolutely.
Racial dominance and superiority wasn't something he constructed. All he had to do was look across the ocean, the Atlantic, and he would see America where there was a racial hierarchy already in existence, which had been in existence for centuries.
Yep, absolutely.
For centuries. Mass killing of people who are deemed less than. Well, what do you call lynchings? You know what I'm saying? What do you call those? When that was one of the primary ways to deal with Black Americans when white people thought they were getting out of line. And a lot of it had nothing to do with the so-called accusation, touch somebody or whatever else. When we really look at the research and the data, a lot of these lynchings are economic and politically motivated. Somebody went to register to vote. How dare they? We're going to go lynch them. The Tulsa Race Massacre in Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma, thriving Black community, banks, law firms, the Dreamland Theater, the whole shebang, destroyed out of pure racial hatred. And then the cover up calling it a riot when over, I believe it's about 250 to 300 Black Americans were killed and buried in mass graves. And the debate on whether those individuals and their descendants are deserving of reparations is still going on currently. And so when we go over the Tulsa Race Massacre, I make sure to let students know history does not stay. Like, the people may die, but the impact, it lives on. And the people of Tulsa, Oklahoma today, those political leaders and those residents are still wrestling with something that occurred over 100 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason why I asked you that, let me give you a little bit of context of why I asked you. And I'll just be, in complete transparency. You already know, but for the audience, I firmly am outside of the two-party system. I believe that the Democratic Party has, like Malcolm X said, I can't quote him exactly, but he said they're like the fox, the sly ones who I don't know what they're thinking. And at least the other people will tell me to my face. So it's like the snake in the grass that you can't see coming, but it'll bite you anyways, your feet when you're not looking or whatever.
Yes.
Or stab you in the back. And so the reason why I ask that is because I do believe that if you continue to teach the truth, as you have said, that students will come to their own conclusions if we give them the proper frameworks to understand that these are our two only options. Like, it's there are other political parties. I'm a Green Party member myself. And I know that it's not our job as teachers to say you should be a party of the Democratic establishment, or you should be part of a Green Party or a PSL, a Party for Socialist Liberation. But I think that these narratives and these stories will provide them with the frameworks or the way of seeing the world that will make them more curious as to, why is it so difficult to work outside of the two-party system? Why isn't it that I've never heard of a party outside of the Democrat versus Republican? Why is it that we look at the Democrats as working for working class people, even though there's no evidence of that ever in the history of the United States? In fact, the Democratic Party, again, this is not only my opinion. This is a large swath of socialist people's opinion, that they're counter-revolutionary. So they're compatible, right? They're the compatible left. They're the left. And I get that word from Gabrielle Rockhill, just trying to cite my sources. And so, he argues that there's this compatible left that acts like they are working for the working class and working for liberation, and they only go so far in order to be a barrier for those that are actually being silenced, buried. And, like even with Roosevelt, like the Great New Deal and all of that, like
Yeah,
that was a socialist movement. Those were socialist
yeah,
ideas. And all of that story got lost because, there was this HUAC committee who went after these
yeah,
people, the Teamsters, and all of this is happening at the
yeah.
same
Well, I
time.
tell our students that it's socialism. I tell our students that because I can't have our students just formulating ideas based off what they get on the news,
Misconceptions.
misconceptions, false
Mm-hmm.
information. Um,
Yeah. And
like
so,
letting our students know that ultimately, like socialism is not a bad thing. Like maybe some of the places that you have studied throughout your curriculum might be presented in that way, but the idea of socialism and the ways that we have seen it in our country aren't necessarily bad. We needed the New Deal. The unfortunate thing about it is it didn't really trickle well to Black Americans.
mm-hmm.
And so when we think about the Democratic Party, like the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party have failed Black Americans specifically, but also other people of color as well, and the working class as well. It's you said two
Mm-hmm.
cheeks on the same butt.
I love
And I
that.
always hear the phrase two wings of the same bird. Because somebody said, well, I'm left wing, I'm right wing. It's like, but the wings belong to the same bird.
Yep.
And it's still gonna fly you exactly where they want you to be.
Right. And you stole that bird from the indigenous people in the first place.
No, facts.
Yeah.
Facts.
Yeah. 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 So, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I really, for this podcast, I do feel as a white person, that I need to talk to the white teachers. And in Iowa, it's 95%, 95.5, I think exactly percent of the
Is
teaching
it?
population. And in the United States, it's about 80%, which is very disproportional
Yes.
to obviously even in Waterloo, Iowa is disproportionate. And then in the United States, it's disproportionate as well. And so, when you are teaching these type of issues or these knowledges, do you have anything like, because I know that there's probably it's challenging and it can be challenging. So if you're talking to like a white teacher, what would you say would be a way to approach this knowledge if it's not something that you've experienced yourself?
Read, research.
Yep. Okay.
Um, because there's information out there, right? There's so many scholars out there who have tackled some of these subjects. And so I don't sit here and pretend to be an expert, but I do have experiences and I have knowledge and wisdom. But I try to find various sources that speak to the subject matter that I'm trying to give our students. And so if a teacher is white, I would encourage them to take that route as well, but also have conversation. And I'm not saying just seek out the only person of color on your teaching staff, and like because that can be annoying. And I've had that happen to me, especially in early 2020 when a lot of still racial unrest, but a lot of racial unrest, George Floyd and everything was going on. I was getting random calls like, "Hey, can I talk to you about race?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what made you want to be like? What made you think of me as the source? Like I can give you everything, but well intentioned, but." I don't pretend to be the spokesperson for all Black people, but I think that those conversations, if they're approached delicately, can be very rewarding. I have had people come up and just very genuinely ask for guidance or wisdom. Hey, what do you think about this? Or I was planning to teach this. What are your thoughts? And then I give them my thoughts and they take it in stride. But I think if a person desires to bring that kind of information to the classroom, there are resources out there to make sure that you can get a hold of it. Some buildings have instructional coaches, and you can work with instructional coaches to get resources. Instructional coaches will take you through learning cycles where if you want to try something new, you can partner with them and they can take you through it and even plan alongside with you. Um, One
Mm-hmm.
thing last year, I wanted our department to get stronger with the collection of data and making it more intentional on how we use it to inform our daily practices. And so I connected with our instructional coach and we were given books to study as a department. And this was outside of the the normal responsibilities and the roles that we already have. So this was something on top of everything else. But we also
Hmm.
had a department that understood that, hey, man, we need to get better at this. How can we get better at this? Let's go find someone who can at least lead us in the right direction. I think when that
Hmm.
desire is there, that want is there, you can make it happen. One of the issues I have dealt with in my experience is that some people don't look at it that way. Based on their own experiences, they may believe that the way they grew up, the world and the way that they see it, that's how everybody sees it. And so they may not feel a need to bring in diverse perspectives into the history class because they view history as being what it is that they learned. Christopher
Hmm.
Columbus and these great founding fathers. And I try to steer away from those things. I let our students know that we're going to talk about some complicated individuals, some people who
Hmm.
have done some really great things, or some people who have done some horrible things. But guess what?
Yeah.
They're all humans, and so are we. And we all are capable of great good and great evil. So let's
Yep.
learn from these individuals, their successes, their shortcomings and failures, so that way we can be better leaders and we can be better people. We can inform ourselves in a better way by learning from those who came before us. And so even when we tackle somebody like a Woodrow Wilson, I try to use it as a leadership example. Like, what kind of leader was he? Great leader in the sense that he looked at having a League of Nations or a United Nations sort of organization to help manage conflict globally. Oh, great idea. But this guy was a segregationist. He was an avid racist. We can't leave that part off the books either, because that's very telling when your president is an avid racist. I think it's very telling when we go to founders and people who wrote the Constitution and then have the discussion that a lot of these individuals owned black people. They enslaved people.
Hmm.
The same people who wrote the documents talking about freedom owned 200, 300, and even more enslaved individuals, many who never would see freedom. I think that's also telling as well. And so we wrestle with those concepts. And one thing, I like to do in my class, which takes me out of the conversation, is I like to implement Socratic seminars where there's
Okay.
student-led conversations. I might construct the questions. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes they do. And when they do, sometimes it works out better. But
Okay.
they engage in the conversation. And then I find it to be so rich when you have a class of 25 students, maybe 20 of them get into the circle at various points. Well, that's 20 different perspectives. You just learned from 20 other individuals in the classroom, and that's so much more valuable than learning just from me exclusively. I'm one
Hmm.
person, I got a perspective, but I am not the source of all the knowledge. And so trying to instruct our students to be learners and
Hmm.
seekers of knowledge themselves is so critical in what I do. And so
Yep.
that's why I try to approach history from a perspective or position that we can learn from this. Um, we need to learn from it so that way we don't repeat it. I know that's cliche, but it's the reality that history and the behaviors, ideas, they do repeat, or some of them just continue to evolve and go on with time. But
Hmm.
making sure our students understand that history is a discussion. It's not one perspective. Like, you can take the same subject, Jim Crow South, and you can find so many different perspectives on that. You can get a segregationist perspective. You can get a sharecropper's perspective. You can get a black person who owns a business perspective, someone who owns land, someone who was, or at least at that time, would have stood out to be an exception, if you will. You can get that perspective. So bringing those pieces into the conversation, I just feel that it builds up our students. I try to, they actually call me like the Socratic seminar person. Like at the school,
I
they,
love it.
a lot of people come up to me asking about how to implement it, what to do with it. And I love sharing the information with, because no matter what class you're in, when it's done right, and after it's a few tries, it's not like you do it on the first time and it's just magic. It doesn't work that way ever. But after so many times of doing it, man, that thing runs itself. Kids are just involved. And then you have students like fighting to get into the middle to discuss topics. And some of these topics may be difficult and challenging topics to talk about, but they're still willing to go in and have the conversation because we try to create an environment, even in the classroom, where everyone's safe and everyone has a viewpoint. And you may not agree with it, but let's do our very best to respect and acknowledge another person's viewpoint.
Yeah, and right, there's one thing agreeing, but there's another thing saying like, no, this isn't about agreeing or disagreeing. This is just what it is.
Yes,
Just because the whole thing like I have my opinion, you have yours. Like, no, some opinions aren't based in truth, and some are. So we do need to
facts,
definitely work
facts.
through that through these conversations. And I think another thing that I'm hearing you say that's so important is now, I mean, obviously read, listen, number one. But then when you get in the classroom, I've seen teachers freeze, like, and I'm talking about teachers who I would consider very knowledgeable about, contemporary events, the history,
Hmm.
multilingual teachers. I'm talking about multilingual white teachers who have learned another language after they learned English. And students will bring up conversations of race. It might not be a topic like in a Spanish class, for example, which is where I'm mostly in because of with my
Yeah,
degree, Spanish and English. But I'll see students will bring up some sort of tension, racial tension that's existing in that classroom or in the community at that moment, and the teacher doesn't know what to do with it. So they use this like discursive move to change the subject rather than like dive in and take that risk, even if they don't feel completely prepared about that conversation. So that would be one thing that I think is important to kind of
yes,
try to like everything you said put into a nutshell, like just dive in, take those risks. The kids will tell you. And that's what I love about high school students so much is if you say something wrong or say something that the kids don't like, they're going to tell you
yes. Oh yeah,
right away. They're not going to do it behind your back like university students will do. Um, and so I think that is something that, we as white teachers need to take advantage of like trusting that we are also allowed to make mistakes as long as we've created that environment, like you were saying earlier, that environment that's safe for us to be
yes,
here working through these nuances, right? These complexities together.
absolutely.
And if there's a time when this is happening, even if we have to get through, like in my case, these whatever past tense verbs, if there's something going on, like I remember one time, and there was some Cedar Falls students who made a cake. You remember the cake
I do.
with,
Yeah.
so the kids were, they came in and they were talking about it. And I was like, oh my God, like we were supposed to be doing present tense conjugations today. But you know what? Scratched my lesson plan and we took the whole entire class period for them to just be able to like, let's talk about it. Cause I know that
Yes.
there's a lot of emotions going on. I know that this is violent, linguistically violent. The fact that they post, like just the whole 9 yards of it. And so I think that that's
Yeah.
something that I would like to highlight too is like, don't be so tied to the lesson plan and think that you need to be, like you said, the most knowledgeable person, the sage on the stage.
Yes.
Let the students talk about it. And then you are
Absolutely.
a human being too, that has something to input. And if you feel uncomfortable later on, maybe go journal about it or go reflect on that. Like what
Yes.
made me so uncomfortable? What do I need to know that I didn't know before to prepare myself for, future conversations
Right.
or future lessons?
Which takes reflection,
Mm-hmm.
which takes someone to
Absolutely.
be reflective. I'm so glad and thankful that within our district, our instructional coaches are working on reflective teaching, thinking about what it is that you have done in the course of a class period or a day. Was it impactful? Did were students reached? What were the conversations? But being reflective. And so not all teachers are, but the ones that are, I think that they can definitely continue to grow. The ones that don't reflect as much, because everybody's at different stages of reflection,
Mm-hmm.
then that's where, admin, instructional coaches, that's the job. As you are supposed
Mm-hmm.
to help someone and coach someone to come along and become a more reflective teacher. Maybe they go from point one to point two. That's fine. They made
That's, yeah,
progress
that's
as
growth.
long as they continue to make progress. One thing you said, and it made me really start to think about the teacher being centered in the classroom, and something I try to get away with is not to center myself. I think sometimes we run into trouble when those conversations get started in the class. Like maybe a student comes in, they bring up the cake. when you think that you're the one that's supposed to provide a correct answer or solve a
Mm-hmm.
problem. That's not necessarily what students are asking you to do. They just want to have a conversation. Now, sometimes you allow a conversation. I mean, if you do let it happen, make sure that your classroom is structured in a way where
That part. That's very
it
important.
it doesn't get out of hand and it doesn't become a disruption, because if it's just an arguing and shouting match, we're not getting anywhere. But if we can have engaging
Didactic
discussion, we
conversations.
can
Yep.
have dialogue, even if it's difficult and challenging dialogue and subject matter, we can have that. But we got to establish the environment where every voice matters, where we don't wickedly and purposely try to cut others down or offend others. Like I don't play that nonsense. Like that's not what
Mm-hmm.
we're doing in here.
Mm-hmm.
But the conversation piece as well, and I think a way that educators can get themselves out of that situation is let your students talk. And sometimes, as you said, the richest experience in the classroom sometimes comes in those ways where it deviates from the curriculum. Like you had a plan that day, you had it all laid out, you did it over the weekend, or maybe you did it that morning. But anyway, you got
That
your
part,
plan
yeah.
laid out, but then it went a different way. Sometimes it doesn't hurt just to let it go that way because the students get so much more out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of alluded to that when I was talking about the Socratic seminars. I always encourage our students to have their own questions, create student generated questions. And there have been a few times where my questions didn't get covered because they spent all their time with their own questions that they had generated. To be honest with you, I feel like that's more powerful and a better use of time in certain
Mm-hmm.
cases, because these are the questions that they want to wrestle with. They want to talk about. So there's automatic buy-in right there.
Yep, that part.
They
Yep.
also have different perspectives. And sometimes the students, man, they bring in a perspective or a viewpoint that is just like, wow, I did not know that this person thought this way, and I would never be hip to have those experiences if I didn't open up the classroom for a discussion, if I didn't invite and welcome it, or if I didn't expect it, because I expect it. You come to my
Yep.
class, Mr. Timms, we're having Socratic seminars. It's graded. Everybody's in there. Everybody's in.
I
But
love that. I love that. And I think about reflecting what I'm thinking about when I'm talking to my pre-service teachers. Well, it's like we want all of it's like one of those little we talk about in this podcast, like red flag words. I call them like red
yeah,
flag words. And one of the red flag words that I hear pre-service teachers using a lot is like all of my students. Like, well, I want all of my students to learn. I'm thinking about all of my students. And I'm like, have you ever thought about race? Like, do you reflect on race? Do you notice what students you call on by race? Do you notice what students that you castigate by race?
mhm,
And they're like, I thought we were not supposed to, we're not supposed to do that. And it's like, well, how about you do that? Let's have a conversation the next time you guys come back to class upon that reflection specifically of, because sometimes, these implicit biases, you're not even sure, you don't even know what you're doing because you're too busy telling yourself you don't see race and
right,
you're here for all of your students. So
absolutely.
I think that's an important component again. Just all I usually pose that to all my pre-service teachers, but I think it's especially important for white teachers who it seems to be a big obstacle sometimes for them to actually even just say that out loud. Like, I
Yeah,
see race. It's real,
absolutely.
it exists, and race, you know what I mean? And I could, how do I want to say this? There are ways in which I teach that are racist, whether or not I'm conscious or not of it, but without that reflection and without that like kind of like really raw type of approach to teaching, especially in a district where you have a majority minority, we're doing so much harm to our students if we use
Yes,
that framework of like, oh, the big melting pot, I don't see anything, it's
yes,
everybody's who then, because like what, like
yeah,
who's everybody,
absolutely.
right? Yeah.
One of the critical questions we tackle, and it's early in the year, is what does it mean to be an American?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what does that mean? And then we start to discuss that, and students obviously they give their ideas. And like, well, where does that come from? Like, what's the origin of that? Who
Yeah.
said that that was what an American is? Who set the foundation for what that is? So we try to get our students to understand that these constructs aren't set in, even race itself is a
They're not even
construct.
real.
It's not
Like
even real.
what
Biologically, it's not
language
even
does the
real.
United States speak? English? That's bullshit. We don't speak English.
Man,
Like that was an imposed language on us. And the dominant class speaks English, and we have learned English because of A, B, and C. But
yes,
there's so many other languages. Even in Waterloo, there's 100 plus languages that are spoken.
so many. Too
Yeah,
many for us to have interpreters for,
that part.
honestly.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, and that's no knock. That's just showing, like, I took a college class when I was getting my master's. I had a class, I think it was a geography class, and we were talking about immigration. And even at that point, as you said, there were like 160 different languages being spoken in Iowa alone at that time. I'm sure the number has gone up since then. That was like 7 years ago, 8 years ago.
And nonetheless,
And
the
even then, we
official
didn't have enough
language is
interpreters.
English. Yeah, and the official language in Iowa is English.
Mm.
Yeah. So again, getting our students to see these contradictions, I think, is super important. And so we're gonna transition into the last topic that I'm excited to hear about because we kind of talked about it, we touched on it, but I was like, let's wait for the recording because I'm interested in this. I think other people need to hear it. So, as you know, we're from the place that Nicole Hannah Jones is from. I don't
Yes,
know about you, but I feel super proud. She has been one of the motivating factors
absolutely.
for this podcast and giving somebody like little old me from a little
Yeah,
town in
she's great.
Iowa a voice. And I think that I appreciate that so much because we tend to, elevate sports players that
Yes,
make it,
yes.
musicians that make it, which again, super proud of those
Super
people
proud.
too. But scholars who, I've always been like on the nerdy side of things. So it's like, oh
Yes,
my God, somebody that like reads and writes and did this thing.
yes,
And like
yes.
she's internationally known and she created all this
She's
controversy.
phenomenal.
Was like the 1619 project was kind of a catalyst for reincorporating an African American studies. But what do you guys call it?
The African American experience.
Experience, the African American experience course that inspired Nicole Hannah Jones so much with with Mr. Ray Dial, her West High school teacher, in the African American studies class that she had.
Yeah.
And then I think there was a hiatus. This was it was in the 70s or 80s, somewhere around there. And then there was no African American studies class when I know that we went to East High.
I
And
took one.
then you did take one. So I
Yeah, I
never even
did.
knew about it.
Yeah, I took so Timo
Okay.
and Miss Hallberry, who came as a counselor,
Oh yeah, yeah,
taught
I know
taught
his.
the
Yep.
class. And so I took the class there, and I don't know what happened though. After I took that class, it was only one semester, elective course.
What
I
year
don't
was
know when
that?
that my
Was that your
sophomore,
senior
junior
year?
year,
Sophomore,
or
junior.
sophomore,
Okay, so I would have
junior,
been there. Yeah, okay.
maybe senior year. It might have been senior year.
If it was
I
your
can't
senior year,
remember.
that makes sense because I wouldn't have been there. Because
Yeah,
I
it
never
might
heard
have
about
been my senior year, but
it. Okay.
after I graduated, though, I don't know what happened to it. Like, I don't know when it had stopped being offered, but I know when we picked it back up because I was on the ground level to help construct the class.
So will you share that story? That's what I want to hear that story of how you guys got it going and what it was like being on the ground and trying to put
So,
this into play.
and there's all kind of stories out there, but it wasn't offered. Like, I believe that it was on the course of studies, but the struggle is that no students were interested and nobody wanted to teach it. And so it was one of those things where it's listed, but it fell to the wayside. You don't use it, you lose it, I guess. I don't know. But at the Gallagher Blue Dorn 1619 project, it's out, it's doing amazing. Nicole Hannah Jones comes back home. They have the program at the Gallagher Blue Dorn, and it was discovered that Waterloo schools wasn't offering Black history. And that was kind of embarrassing to be a district serving so many Black and brown students and not have the class filled and offered. And so work began to build the class. I was a part of it. That would actually been my first year coming to East, transitioned from teaching middle school and got right to work within the department, building the class. And I was approached about teaching the class. Feel like it was because I was Black, but I don't know for certain. But I have a hunch. But no, of course, I was excited to teach the class until I was told by a colleague, department head at the time, that we were going to start with 1619. The project was out, There was a lot of conversation about it. Waterloo was clearly proud of the work that Nicole Hannah-Jones had done. And we're going to start with 1619 because that's what her work is, and we're going to use her curriculum. I'm like, whoa, full stop here. First and foremost, it's not a full curriculum. It is a resource that has so many subjects within it. It is not one monolithic piece. Like there's a variation of articles in there. And so they kept trying to push me to use the curriculum and kept trying to have the conversation that the curriculum that you're telling me to use, that you think I'm going to use from day one in the semester to the last day, it doesn't exist because the 1619 project is not a full built out curriculum that can be implemented into the classroom. It is valuable when you're using it as a source. Like, hey, we want to talk about economics in America and how race and slavery is tied to that. Let's look at this article from the 1619 project, or let's better yet go to Hulu and watch the episode Economics, and then we can get some of those professionals or primary sources, those well-knowledge people that those critics try to say were not a part of the 1619 project. Yeah, all those people they're there within the docu-series, doctors and lawyers and people who know and have studied, anthropologists who studied the material, and they know what they're talking about. So it's very valid, and very accurate information. It just might not be the kind of content that people want to discuss because it makes people uncomfortable. It puts a different light on our history, and it takes away these, and I don't want to say it in the wrong way, but it takes away this romanticized view of red, white, and blue and stars, happily ever after, home of the brave, land of the free, and yet people were enslaved here. Like before America was even America, there were enslaved people here. We didn't become a country in 1619, but we sure as heck had slavery from 1619. Some people don't know that early on that it wasn't even exclusively Africans that were enslaved, and that slavery was not it wasn't fully permanent. But two indentured servants who happened to be white and a man of African descent, John Punch, they ran from the plantation. They all get caught. They get punished. The indentured servants, I think they get whipped. But John Punch gets a lifetime of servitude. You no longer have an option. You're never going to be free. You're never going to leave this existence. And then over time, that becomes the norm. This is permanent, in that Black people are a permanent, like working class, slave class in America. They're the capital that helps to produce the products, the cotton that helps to finance our banks that people don't know about. And that railroad that became
doing the work.
That came so impactful. Yeah, it was financed off money that was built off slavery. So when people say that Black people built America, that's what they're talking about. That the literal White House was built by Black Americans that were enslaved. That's what we mean. Our institutions, our colleges, built off of money that was generated from enslaved labor. And those are some of the discussions that I don't necessarily get into the U.S. history classroom, but we definitely cover in the African American experience, which is why I love it so much. I actually preface it to our students that Black American history is African American history, or is American history, excuse me. Yes, it is American history. And that a lot of the content that we're going to discuss, you're going to see some overlaps from what you learned as a freshman in U.S. history. We're going to talk about it again, but from a Black perspective, and you're going to really get the details of what that experience was like. And so we built the class. I told him I wasn't starting with 1619. That was what I was told that I had to start with. And I said, I'm not doing that. We're going to the continent of Africa. We're going to go to Western Africa, where a lot of enslaved people were taken from. And we're going to start there. And we're going to talk about the empire of Mali and Songhai. We're going to talk about Ghana. We're going to talk about Mansa Musa. We're going to talk about these individuals. We're going to talk about how Mansa Musa went on a pilgrimage and gave out so much gold that he nearly bankrupted Egypt. But that it also let Europeans know, hey, there's a lot of gold over there. Didn't know Europeans stepped foot on the continent of Africa because it was poor. Stepped on the foot of Africa because it was rich in resources.
Because it was rich.
And that's why they stayed for centuries and colonized for
Still
diamonds,
there. Still
rubber,
there.
gold, coffee, oil. I got a map in my classroom that I love to present to the students, and it has shout out to Precious Clark. Shout out to Precious Clark. She made it
Oh,
for
I
me.
love her.
Uh,
Okay.
so she made it, and it has all of the resources that Africa produces naturally on the continent. And I use it as an example to show, and this is why colonization takes place, because they knew it was there. But we talk about that. We talk about the impact of Islam in Western Africa. We talk about a lot of those things. How there were textbooks, the University of Timbuktu that Greek and Roman scholars went to learn from African Moors, mathematics, astrology, medicine. And these are things that our students don't get. Our students think, and not at their own fault, but it's how we shape the history and how we teach it.
Mhm.
And the reality is our elementary students get very little history because the focus is a lot on math and English, because that's where the test scores are and that's where some of the deficits are. And so a lot of the social studies content gets pushed to the side in elementary. So students are coming to middle school and high school
That's
not
true.
having some of that material that we were getting when we were going through school, like states and capitals and presidents and,
Yeah,
you know,
I was just gonna say that, even the most
some of the most basic
basic
stuff.
stuff. Yeah.
And so our students then have their own perceptions of Black history. Maybe it's what a parent taught, maybe it's what they gathered on TV, maybe it's a little what they learned in school. But there are so many that do think that the history starts with slavery.
Mhm.
They don't know that there are empires on the continent of Africa, that Africa is a home to 54 countries, that there are so many languages there, that there are thriving cities currently on that continent, that the map of Africa today isn't even what it would have looked like during the period prior to colonization.
Had there not been, yeah.
That these maps and these borders were redrawn.
And what it does when you carve up communities like that, and
Yes.
languages and cultures and
And some of the warring nations, people who have been in odds with one another, who are made to live in proximity with one another due to these borders being drawn, during the colonists coming in and taking over and exploiting resources. And then when they finally did give independence, well, then what we see today in some of those impoverished areas are the effect of colonization or the effect of
Mhm.
political unrest that is also a result of colonization.
Yep. And give independence. No, no, independence was never given. It
Right.
was fought for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I've just really have enjoyed teaching that class. We use a resource in there, Stamped the remix actually.
Okay.
So the original was stamped from the beginning. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, phenomenal writer. I've read quite a few of his books. I actually read Stamped in one day because I could not put it down. But we
We'll put
got
this in the resources, by the way. This will be in the resources down in
yeah,
my description. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
absolutely. And so we got a class set of the remix that was written by Jason Reynolds, renowned
I
novelist, writer.
My
He actually
favorite.
was just here in the Louvre for the African American reading for the 1619 project. Shout out Sharita Stokes, Nicole Hannah Jones, Lori Dale, the whole crew, Joy Silas, man, you all did a phenomenal job. But Jason Reynolds walking in that place, and I was like
Yep. I
starstruck.
just read one of his books to my son last night.
I
He's
was
one of my favorite
starstruck.
children's authors, especially from my son.
So reading it, and I put it in the hands of our students, it's like they're engaged in a conversation with the author,
Yep.
the way that it's written. And it's going through the history of racism, race, and enslavement. Like the whole history of race from the very beginning. And our students are so shocked to know that there's a history of race, like that we can trace it, that we can talk about Gomez
Very
de
documented.
Zurara and how he wrote about Prince Henry's voyages and I can't remember the exact place, but when they started enslaving Africans, Gomez de Zurara framed it as missionary work, that they were
Mhm.
spreading the love of Christ by
That's
putting
another
people
red
in
flag word.
shackles and
Missions a
the
red
whole
flag. That's
of
what I say in this podcast. Missions a red flag.
Yeah, so missionary did the work of Jesus Christ by not showing love, not not love, not healing, but shackles in the hulls of slave ships, packed like sardines, treated like less than an animal. And so it goes through that, but then it will also bring up to current issues like the war on drugs. We don't get to that in U.S. history because that gosh dang curriculum map, man. I mean, realistically, you just don't get to that.
Mhm.
You don't get that far. You don't get into the 80s. You don't get how the government flooded the streets with crack. You know what I'm saying? And so when our students are in there, here you talk about working class people, right?
Yep.
When we start going into that content, and like myself, so I'm telling on myself, like me, who has relatives who struggle with addiction, crack cocaine being one of them. They grew up in the 80s, in the 90s. I have students who also can empathize with that situation. And when they realize, oh man, the CIA flooded the streets with crack cocaine so they could fund a war in Nicaragua to stop communists and then gave guns to Iran. Like they're like, what?
All those
What?
connections. Yep.
All those connections. So no,
Yep.
that's like it's done on purpose. And so yes, there's people right now who are still battling addiction from something that was purposely placed in their community. No one knew what the effects were going to be, how dangerous, how addictive it was. It was just a new thing, but that new thing made so much money that it was able to fund the war against the Contras. And so our students learn that in the African American experience. They get that kind of information, and it's so eye opening for them because then they
Mhm.
can start to make sense of the world that they live in right now.
Yep.
And then
Definitely.
sometimes that's hard to do when we get to the civil rights movement in the spring, and then we got to play the Russian game the rest of the year and just kind of hit on different subjects. And those are the most current subjects and some of the ones that have the greatest impact and relevancy, excuse me, to our students. And so it's always very frustrating for me to not get up to like 2020. You know, I would love to talk about
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
effect of COVID and how COVID disproportionately affected people who were impoverished and people of color.
Hmm.
I would love to talk about that, but
And
we
it's
just don't get that
unfortunate
far.
that, yeah, you only get a semester, maybe a year if you're lucky, right?
Yes.
Not enough
So
time.
the class is so important, man, and it's an elective course, so students got to choose it. But the students who've chosen it and have stuck with it, they've always have had a good experience. They've had takeaways from it. I've had students who joined that class who the first time they read a book from cover to cover
Wow.
was in that class. It's like they hated
I love
reading.
that.
I was like, I put a book in their hands that was written by someone that looked like them and it talked like them, and they're like, "Oh man, I can read. This ain't no
I
textbook."
just said that. I said that in the previous podcast. Like we talk about kids not wanting to read books. It's like, I know if you give them these texts, they'll read them. I
Oh
know
yeah,
they will. Yeah.
yes they will. And so that's
Yep.
like the diversify. I keep bringing that diversifying the classroom. Graphic novels, they work. Some
Yep.
people frown against them though. Like they feel that a student needs to read like a traditional novel. Scarlet Letter, hated it,
No, yeah. I mean,
hated
there's
it.
so many types
But
of texts,
but you can learn metaphor, simile, and figurative language with text. With pick one. Pick
literally.
one. Pick one that you know your students will eat up because they might not go for uh To Kill a Mockingbird, but they
Even
may
symbols,
go
right?
for
Symbols are text. You can interpret them.
right. They may go for
Yeah.
the Hate You Give though. And when students have read that in the English department, shout out to them. They've loved it, but it was something that they could resonate with, including our white students as well. They
Mhm.
resonated with it. They enjoyed the book, and that's
They want
also
these stories too because they want it
yes,
to
they
make
do.
sense. Yep.
Yes, they do. You know, in those Socratic seminars, man, I'll be honest with you. In my advanced classes, it's predominantly white, but never lacking in depth of conversation, even when it's on subject matter of race, even when it's about tough subjects. There's still meaningful conversations. They're still deep. There's like our students are so aware and so intelligent about what is going on.
Yeah.
I just really believe that it's our job to help them draw their own conclusions. And the only way we can do that is by giving them the information letting them have a hand on the resources. It's just unfortunate that resources like STAMP and many schools are being banned because they don't want students to have access to that information, to that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So,
That's a subject for a different day. I hope to have you back on and maybe we can
oh
talk about
yeah,
that stuff that's happening because I would love to, dig into that too. Of course, that's what I've really been looking at these past 5 years is the educational policy, right? And language policy in Iowa
hmm
in particular. But
yeah, yeah.
we won't open that can of worms right now. A couple of resources that I wanted to share with the audience because I think that you brought some. I know that the information is in these books, and so I think you mentioned the Bacon's Rebellion, and that's in the People's History of the United States when you were talking about the coalition of white indentured servants and black enslaved people
So
bonding
actually,
together
what I was talking about, those two indentured servants and John Punch who ran was actually prior to Bacon's
before. Oh, that was
Rebellion.
before
But
Bacon's Rebellion.
I do teach Bacon's Rebellion, and I
Okay, so this was
use
even before. This wasn't
yeah.
necessarily like a
hmm
coalition of people that organized to resist. Okay, cool. They just
Nope.
ran away and got caught.
They just ran away, and so this was before
Oh, cool.
slavery was the full-fledged machine that it would become. It
Well,
was
because Bacon's
still
Rebellion pushed that, didn't they? Like they said, like, oh, you guys can't work together. We got to make sure that there's a difference.
so
And
Bacon's Rebellion. Nathaniel Bacon, this disgruntled farmer who wanted to be able to expand land more west, but couldn't because the governor of Virginia had a deal with the indigenous population for fur trading, and he didn't want to encroach on his money. Like that was messing with his bag, letting those colonists go over there and start taking land. Like it's going to be bad for business, not
okay,
moral or anything, but just bad for business. And so free blacks, enslaved blacks, and poor white farmers teamed up together and they went to the governor's mansion and like set it on fire. They all got
yep,
caught,
that
but
part.
the black rebellion, the ones who were black who rebelled
We're
got the
killed.
harshest consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the earliest forms of white privilege came out of Bacon's Rebellion. They hardly
Yep,
got any of the consequences. They were actually given some of the concessions that they wanted, and they were given to them not because the powers that be wanted them to have it, but it's because they wanted them to stop uniting or to
that
see
part.
uniting with black people and
Yep,
the enslaved black people. Like their unity together was a threat to
it was
their power.
dangerous. So
It was
we need to
dangerous.
remember that. I would let's just love to leave it right there because I think that that is the key. Is whenever there's this type of states, well in this case it was England, right, but like state sanctioned
Yeah.
people, when the state does things to break up these type of resistance movements, we need to keep going. That's the key, that this is what's working, right? This is what is effective. And it
Yes.
in history, historically, that's not what's happened, right? The white people take their white privilege and run with it. But and I know I'm being very binary thinking there and just for time's sake, but that is historically what happens. And so I just wanted to remind working class white people of whose side we actually are really on, and how to impact, like how what liberation looks like for real for everybody. And we need that unity
Yes.
in order
Fred
for
Hampton
it
understood
to.
that.
Yep.
Fred Hampton understood that. He said, wherever there's people, there's power,
Yep.
and was able to construct the Rainbow Coalition, a
Yep.
group of diverse people with a common cause.
Yep. Yep.
Let's build ourselves up because this is a bigger than a race issue. This is a class issue. It's a class issue that is also masked with a race issue, but
It is.
powers that
Yeah. It.
be, they benefit from the division.
Yep.
And so we
That.
see the patterns. And so students actually start to catch those patterns. They really
That
do.
in all these stories, they will. Of course, they will.
They'll
Yeah.
go through the modules, and I like to tell them that don't look at these modules as necessarily individual subjects, but look at
Yep.
them as a continuation of the whole story. Then they
Yep.
start to see patterns. They start to see people unite. They see the powers that be stop it. Workers' rights, the formation of unions. They see all that get demolished. They see people get sent
Yep.
off to Eugene Debs, get sent to prison. They see those things. That any time that the masses come together, it's as if there's something to drive that dividing wedge in between them.
Yep. and it's happening right now. And so I think that if you give them this framework, they'll be able to see it and then continue to, that gives them momentum to continue to, make decisions that work towards liberation. So anyways, so Before the Mayflower, I wanted to recommend to the audience Before the Mayflower, by Lerone Bennett. Is that who it is? Lerone Bennett?
Yes.
And then another People History of the United States has some of that history in it by Howard Zinn. And so for the
Howard Zinn.
audience, those are
That's
some
where
of
I
the
present Bacon's Rebellion from. A
okay.
Young
So
People's History of the United States, Howard Zinn. We use him quite frequently. That's probably one of the only textbooks that I put most frequently in front of our students is that one.
love it, love it. And so yeah, so get your hands on it if you haven't read it already, and if you have read it, it's a good time to review that material. Those are books you have to read like so many times in your life to
And
even
Howard Zinn,
remember
they actually have
everything.
a whole website, the Zen
Yep,
Ed Project, with
yep, they
tons
know
of
about it. I
resources.
shared it. Yep, yep.
Yeah,
I'll put that website again in the discussion, or what is it called, in the description. So
awesome, awesome.
so yeah, thank you for your time, Chris. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. I think the conversation went really well. I loved it. I really enjoyed it.
Yes, I enjoyed it as well. I appreciate you having me on the podcast. I pray that this podcast extends so wide and broad so that way people's lives are impacted and they're made better, that people are able to learn. Educators are able to take the information, learn from the discussions, take part in the discussions.
Mhm.
Hopefully this will continue to have a ripple effect even in classrooms and PLCs, department meetings, where
Yep.
what you're bringing to the table and what you're discussing concerning education and the direction of education is so critical and needs to be discussed. So I'm just glad that you have created a space where educators could come together and talk about education, but talk about some of the things that we don't necessarily get a chance to talk about during the school year, but are so critically important to everything we do during the school year. So
Yes.
shout out to you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you and take care.
You as well. Take
All right.
care.
Bye bye.